So I want to begin with some words of welcome. We'll take down the slide. Thank you. So to those of you on the West Coast, it's good afternoon. If you're where I am on the East Coast, it's good evening. If you're somewhere in between, it's afternoon or evening or supper time. Welcome. I am Rabbi Beth Clafter, one of two co-presidents of the Women's Rabbinic Network, along with Emily Siegel. On behalf of Emily and our executive director, Rabbi Mary Zamor, and all of our board members, we welcome you to WRN's Journey to 50 speaker series. And as we gather across North America, we take a few moments, though, to turn our thoughts to the tragedies and the violence that some are experiencing around the world. And we pause for a moment to think of those in Ukraine, as I share some of the words composed by our colleague, Rabbi Rachel Sabath Beit Halachmi, a prayer for peace. We come before you, Adonai, praying for peace. We stand together with our brothers and sisters in Ukraine, the birthplace of so many of our ancestors, a place where the Jewish people has known both light and darkness. May our people remember that wherever a Jew is in danger or hurt, we all feel that danger and pain as they seek to cover from the life-threatening missiles and fire falling from the sky, as they help the elderly and hug their children tightly and defend their homeland. We pray that they can maintain hope, that a Sukkot Shalom, a canopy of blessing and peace, will soon emerge above them. May the source of all life protect all of humanity from violence. May the source of peace bring wisdom to the leaders and bring a sense of tranquility, shalva, to the people of the region, and peace to all who are endangered. Amen. Many of you may know that our World Union of Progressive Judaism has established a special fund. I'm going to drop in the chat for some of you. World Union has established a fund to assist particularly Jewish communities in Ukraine. So we invite you to consider donating there if you're able. Tonight is the second in our series of programs. Last month, we learned with our teacher, Rabbi Carol Balin, PhD, about the historical context and lessons of the last 50 years of women in the Rabbinic. Tonight's program is called On the Front Lines, Jewish Women Seeking Justice. It's been planned and will be moderated and led tonight by our friends and colleagues, Rabbi Rachel Schmelkin and Rabbi Bess Wollner, and we thank the two of you especially. Our series will continue on April 5th, May 11th, and June 2nd, which is the eve of the 50th anniversary of Sally J. Presand's ordination from HUC JIR. The dates and information for all of our series is on our website. We'll drop that into the chat as well during the evening. I mentioned earlier we're recording tonight so that those who can't be with us or you want to relive the experience can do so. It will be on our website. I want to thank not only Rabbi Schmelkin and Rabbi Wollner for tonight's program, but the many, many colleagues who have prepared the programs in our entire series. WRN is grateful to the Women of Reform Judaism and the Yes Fund in particular for sponsoring this program in particular. We thank the WRJ and our friend and colleague, Rabbi Marla Feldman, for the ongoing partnership that our two organizations have. WRN is the proud grantee of the Jewish Women's Fund of Atlanta and the SRE Network. We appreciate all of you, colleagues and friends, students and teachers of ours, for your participation in our programming, for your sharing in the celebration of this wonderful anniversary, and for your support of WRN. We invite you, if you wish, to make donation to WRN in honor of this series, in honor of the anniversary of our ordination, and you may do that as well on our website. We'll drop that into the chat during the evening. It is now my pleasure to turn the Zoom screen and desk over to my colleagues, Rabbi Bess Wollner and Rabbi Rachel Schmelkin. Rachel serves as secretary on the board, and Bess, we're so thrilled that you are also helping us in this leadership role.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Clafter. I want to also welcome everyone here. Thank you for making the space in your day to spend what I hope will be a powerful hour hearing from three incredible justice seekers who are with us tonight. Each of these rabbis centers the pursuit of justice in their rabbinates, transforming stated values into tangible actions. I'm honored to be with you today to introduce our three panelists: Felicia Saul, Rabbi at B'nai Jeshurun in New York City; Lauren Tuchman, Rabbi and Jewish spiritual educator teaching inclusive Torah; and Susan Talve, Senior Rabbi of Central Reform Congregation in St. Louis. And I now want to invite each of you to share just a brief introduction of yourself, where a little bit more than just where you happen to work, but a little bit about yourself and where and how justice shows up in your work, or said maybe a simpler way, just some of the areas of justice that you are most, you find yourself working the most in. So we'll start with Rabbi Saul.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here, and thank you to Rabbi Bess and Rabbi Rachel and Rabbi Susan and Lauren. Glad to be on this panel with you. I don't know that much of an introduction in terms of, obviously you could tell a long story about how I got to this moment, and in terms of how I think about my justice work, which I think has evolved over time in terms of thinking of myself as an activist, and also recognizing that the underpinnings of that activism is really defined by a certain orientation spiritually. And so, for many years, I served on the board of Bend the Arc, which is a national organization, and that morphed over time into being a very strong voice, particularly during the Trump years, as well as the Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, which is a local justice organization in New York. And those two organizations, I would say, that's my dog, were at the core, I would say, a version of activism in terms of campaigns and raising voices. But underneath it all, I think my perspective around my commitments to justice come from a notion of spirituality and of oneness in terms of humanity, and the recognition that dignity is an essential Jewish value, and that I would say, and I'm in a community that has been historically known for activism, and certainly I stand on the shoulders of giants in that way. At the same time, I think we've morphed as a community to recognize also the need to bridge difference, bridge in terms of polarization, both in our own community as well as into the country at large. So I'll just conclude the brief introduction by saying I think that over time, a lot of the work that I've been doing has been less on the front lines in terms of protest and more in terms of educating my own community around undoing racism and recognizing that we have to be a micro community of dignity and honor that can then breathe that out in the world. And so some of my orientation has shifted in terms of the ways I do my justice work and where I see myself in terms of the front lines, and where I think also I can have the most impact.
Thank you so much. Rabbi Tuchman.
Thank you so much, and it is just a tremendous honor to be here with all of you on this panel. Thank you so much for having me tonight and this afternoon in this space. So I'm Rabbi Lauren Tuchman. I use she and her pronouns, and I would say there are a couple of areas in which my justice work has been focused. Primarily, it has been in the area of disability inclusion in the Jewish community. I hold the very unique position of being the first blind woman in the world to be ordained a rabbi. So I got very interested in disability inclusion because it was personal. It wasn't simply, the thing over there that was interesting. It was like, oh, this is affecting my life and always has. And, until until ableism is no more, always will, and what are the ways in which we can work together as a community to really confront it within ourselves and within our communities. And so a lot of that work I've also been doing in the educational arena, consulting, doing a lot of speaking, teaching the Torah, intersecting, thinking about Torah and disability and the intersection of the two, teaching some of our texts that present disability in a really positive light, grappling with the harder things. And I do that because what I want us to do, particularly when I'm teaching the more difficult texts in the tradition, is to think about our own choices and our own communities and our own lives, and to ask ourselves the question, do these values in this text, have they actually continued forward into our communities? Because often I think we get to a place, particularly as liberal non-Orthodox Jews, we get to a place of saying, oh, we're not living that way anymore. We don't think that way about disabled people. But actually what I want to encourage us to do is to ask the question, how is this continuing to show up? And also, what are the ways in which our Torah is ahead of itself in terms of thinking about disability? And what are the positive ways in which disability is talked about in Torah? When I say Torah, I mean Jewish tradition generally. And like Rabbi Saul was just talking about, I also have a deep spiritual orientation to this work. For me, the idea that we are created b'tzelem Elokim, that we're created in the image of God, is such a foundational idea. And it is so deeply radical that we don't often think about how radical it is, right? We as a people, we believe that every single human being is created in the image of God. Therefore, every single human being infinitely matters, and every single human being can contribute to the unfolding nature of community and to the Jewish people writ large. And the question that faces us, and it's not always an easy question, and we can talk about this later, how we manifest all of that. One of the things that disability work has really taught me over and over and over is that I don't have the luxury of not dealing with very difficult questions. That the disability community is one that is so multifaceted, and that many needs overlap, or what we say in disability community often is that there are a lot of access conflicts, meaning that one person's needs directly conflict with another person's needs. This happens actually quite frequently. So we have to think together, what are we going to do to navigate that? And what that has brought to my rabbinate in general is the ability to think really critically and really nuanced about a lot of particular areas. And often we don't get to the perfect solution, but we strive to the greatest extent possible to make spaces as accessible as we can. And I also have to just say, and I'll end here, that with the COVID pandemic, the disability community has been so deeply traumatized and affected in ways that are so countless that we probably won't know them all for years to come. So how I think about my work in this arena, this is not the only part of my rabbinate, I do a lot of other teaching, but in this particular area, I am in a deep state of a beginner's mind right now, where I'm thinking, again, like going back to square one, how do we do this? How do we start over? How do we learn from this experience? And how do we grow? And how do we build an even better community than we had before?
Thank you so much. And Rabbi Talve?
I love listening to both Felicia and Lauren, and I resonate so deeply. First, with what Felicia said about the harder work sometimes is that inward work where, you know, it's kind of, sometimes we're more welcomed on the street, you know, with people who are protesting, you know, and we can really resonate with a lot of the protest community, but sometimes dealing with our own communities and really working on the structural change, the paradigm shifts that we know we need to do within our own communities is sometimes the harder work. So I love the way that Felicia framed that, and I really resonate with that as well. And I also love that Lauren, you know, had the courage to frame this as a personal, that her social justice work is personal, because, I think it's when this work becomes personal for us that we're on fire, that our passions are, that we really know, that we're guided, by our own personal stories. I got drawn into the whole healthcare fight way before the ACA, and we started an organization in Missouri called Missouri Healthcare for All. That's now a statewide organization, and fighting for healthcare in a very red state. And and I think part of the thing that has always drawn me to show up and to be on the front line wherever that is as a feminist. I think that I grew up in the 50s, and in the 50s, I saw my mother suffer and being trapped by the feminine mystique. And so that when I got to be, in the 60s, coming of age, I recognized the privilege that I had, that the fight that we had as women. I think was shaped by seeing the challenge that women had in the civil rights movement, and that my feminism was going to really shape all of the responses I had to the suffering that I knew I had to respond to. And then the last thing I'll say about, in way of introduction, is, now probably past the time I should have retired, but still kind of going strong here. When I look back, and I've had the privilege really of being on a lot of front lines. I've had the privilege of really being there as family with people who really are trying to change the world, but change it through the kind of structures that we've been stuck in. That when I look back, I would say that the most important moments that I've had, my justice work, have been those moments that have not been in the newspaper or not been in the news and not been, gotten attention, but they are those private moments, they are those private moments that nobody knows about. I'll end with one. Just, I think about her all the time. A short time after Mike Brown was murdered, and we were on the street, and we heard that there was another young man, an 18-year-old unarmed Black kid, who was shot down by a off-duty police officer in another part of town. And we all rushed there, and his body was still on the ground, bleeding out. And I saw his mother, and I walked up to his mother, and I kind of knew her a little bit, from the protest community. And I just stood with her, and she looked at me, and she took my hand in a very, one of those moments. And she said, "Don't let them turn my son into a thug." And, I feel like that's my work. My work is to, as Rabbi Lauren said so beautifully, to make sure that everybody is seen, to make sure nobody is invisible, to practice that radical hospitality, that radical inclusivity, to see everybody as a vessel of godliness. Nobody gets, nobody is dehumanized on our watch, right? No, and right now, in Missouri, we're fighting these trans bills. We are desperately, we're fighting a lot of terrible legislation. I thought we were through this, and somehow we still have so much work to do to make sure that everybody is seen as a vessel, as a version of God. So that's by way of introduction. I would say I resonate with my sisters, and really grateful to be with all of you today.
Well, I will say I am just so grateful Rabbi Schmelkin and I decided to invite you to introduce yourselves, because just in what you all have shared in the last 10 minutes or so has my mind like spinning and just already so impressed and empowered and just really excited for this conversation. Before I pass it on to Rabbi Schmelkin, I did just want to say the first part of our discussion will be moderated, and then we're going to have a Q&A, assuming we have time. And so if you are someone who is joining us on Zoom and you have a question for one of our panelists or all of our panelists, feel free to drop that in the chat box at any time, and we'll save that for the Q&A session after the moderated part of the discussion.
So I want to dive in a little bit deeper with the three of you and absolutely echo what Beth said. You all, the three of you are so inspirational. And I have the pleasure of learning with Lauren on a pretty regular basis. We're in a DMV area rabbis group together. And then Felicia and Susan, I have sort of admired you from afar for quite some time and seen you as role model rabbis. So you've already alluded to this a little bit, but we want to go a little bit deeper. What is the first injustice you remember noticing or experiencing or witnessing in your life? Maybe it's even back in childhood or in your teenage years. What is that injustice that you saw or experienced, and how does it impact or connect to what you do now?
I can start if that's okay. I remember, I would say it's hard for, it sounds awful to say, but the truth is it's hard for me to think of what was the first instance of ableism that I experienced, because it's just been always there. So what I'll say is that the thing that's coming to mind, when I was a child, unfortunately, this is true of a lot of kids, a lot of kids in general, and then a lot of kids with disabilities in particular. I'm very grateful that in the world we're living today, people are paying more attention to bullying. But I was bullied as a kid, and I remember very clearly they would disguise their voices. So I'd be on the playground and kids would disguise their voices, and they would say, who am I? But they would do it in this very disguised way to try to test me to know if I could tell who they were. And I remember, and I can feel it in my body, when I think about it, right? I can feel the feeling of tears welling up behind my eyes, and the shame and the bushada experience, right? The face flushing. And it's really ultimately, that's what drives my work, is that I don't want to live in a world in which people are humiliated that way, because it's so hard. And I'm sure that my co-panelists can also resonate with this. It's so hard to explain it to people. It's one of those things that you experience and you don't soon forget what it's like. And I think it was Elie Wiesel who said that one should live in such a way that another human being is never humiliated in your presence. And that is ultimately what I try to live by.
Thanks, Lauren. Susan or Felicia, do you want to hop in?
I can hop in. So this is actually one of the questions, in the community organizing model that has become very prevalent in synagogue life, and I think Ben the Ark and amongst others was very essential in putting this forth. And I remember when we were first doing one-on-one conversations in this organizing model, I was asked that question, and I was like, I didn't really know what would surface. And then something which unexpected service, and my parents are here. We lived in New Jersey on a block when I was young until I was 7. I must have been 5 or 6. And a neighbor on the block was a very, lots of families on the block. And the father of one of the families died of a heart attack very young. And his family was essentially barred from seeing the children. in the family. And one day I came home from school, and the aunt and grandparents, I believe, of the children who had not been able to see their father's family since his death were in our home, and the children were brought into our home in order to be able to see their relatives that they hadn't seen since their father died. This made an incredible impression on me in terms of, it was a secret. My mom decided to do it against the will, clearly, of the mother of the children. But it was, in my mind, it made a very deep impression that the risk was worth taking, that you stand up for love, that even amongst hardship and brokenness, you have to assert possibility and relationship. And I think it made just this incredible impression, which in some ways you wouldn't think of that necessarily in a realm of justice. But in my mind, over time, like, that's where I could source the stories of that feeling of the welling up of how broken our world is and how distant we can become, and that it's worth taking the risk necessary to bridge the gap. And so there are many other stories over time, but as a child, that impression was incredibly deep and powerful.
Really appreciate both of you being so vulnerable. Susan?
There we go. We keep going back and forth. I actually, my mind, when you first said that, went to the injustice I felt in growing up during the Vietnam War, and seeing getting in trouble. I mean, I got suspended twice in junior high school, one for wearing blue jeans and one for bringing a Black Panther to my school. That's kind of where I went first. But then listening to Felicia, I think I have to go back earlier, and growing up with the story that my mother had 4 daughters. But between the first 2, I'm the oldest, myself and my second sister. And, I also come from a Sephardic family where, the lore was, oh, my poor dad, there was something wrong with him from his Turkish father, who said, your wife must be stronger than you if you only had daughters. Just growing up with all of that. But the thing that I hadn't really thought about until I was listening to Felicia's story was, between myself and my second sister, there was a little boy who was born, and he lived like 3 days, but they never let my mother hold him. She never held him. And my mother suffered her whole life because of that. And I knew that in my bones, that there was my mother's asthma and all of her health problems, all of her mental health problems came from not being given the opportunity to mourn that child. And, one of the very first things I ever did as a rabbi, 40 something years ago, when I came to St. Louis, was create a ritual for babies that didn't live the 8 days, or even aborted fetuses, stillborns and miscarriages. And, I think in some ways, it wasn't being done much 40 something years ago. So now, thank God, we know better. I think, and I think the point of it, what was so important for me, was they thought they were doing the right thing. They thought they were doing the right thing for my mother, keeping her from having to hold a baby that was going to die. But she never recovered from not having that kind of closure and not being able to hold that baby. And we all suffered for that. We all did. And I think it was an injustice. It was a real injustice. And, you know, I learned you can do injustice out of kindness, out of thinking you're doing the right thing. Injustice can happen. And you know, I still see that. People think they're doing the right thing, and it causes suffering to others. So I think we have to, you know, what I've learned from that is we need, especially in our social justice work, we can't assume that we know. We have to listen to the people who are being affected. So, you know, listening to Lauren, really hearing what Lauren has to say here about what it meant to be bullied as a kid is transformative. This is how we change. This is how we really do the work, is we listen to the people who are on the front line, and we let them lead us, you know. And sometimes it's our turn to lead too, because we're the ones that are hurting, but we have to be very clear about how to do the work right.
Thank you so much for sharing those early memories of witnessing injustice and kind of connecting back in the ways all of you spoke about of really seeing the humanity in everyone. Really kind of that idea kind of rises from what you said as well. I wanted to ask, now moving to the time in your life of being a rabbi, which is now or any time since ordination, but was wondering kind of a moment during which you really felt that your justice or advocacy work had an impact, a time when you truly felt it made a difference. And it could be, Susan, as you shared earlier, it could be the feeling it made a difference to that one person, or, I mean, it sounds like you also created an organization, which is incredible, working on healthcare. So we will let you define what that moment was for you.
I'm afraid to mute myself again. Maybe I'll go. There's so many moments. Oh my God. How do you pick, you know, in a lifetime of having the privilege of, you know, as a rabbi, especially being invited into those holy spaces. But there was a moment in Ferguson where it was nighttime, and it was just before the curfew was about to go in, and the police were in front of us, and, you know, all militarized, and it was a moment where there were going to be rubber bullets flying and you know, arrests being made. But in that moment, a group of clergy came into the street, and, you know, we were not really invited. The young protesters did not want us there. You know, we had failed them. We kept showing up because we cared about them, and we cared about the cause, and we cared about Mike, but we weren't really part of it yet. But that night, just as things were about to get really bad, a group of clergy just got into the middle of the street between the protesters and the police, and we knelt down and we started to pray. It changed everything. But the most important thing that it changed was the protesters stood behind us. They put their hands on our shoulders and they started to pray with us. And the reason that it was an important moment was because, for me, getting to be part of that, it made the relationships of and instead of either or. So that when Israel-Palestine stuff came up, and, you know, I became the terrorist of, you know, all terrorists, not in the protest family. They said, you know, we may not agree with her, but she's family. You can't push her out. It became an and moment between Jews and Christians, between different races, between gender differences. It became an and. Even if we disagreed, even if we didn't know each other yet, we became family in that moment, so that no matter what happened, we were there to get each other's backs. It changed everything. And it changed it for me. It made a place in the movement for me to be able to really use my privilege to impact that movement for change, for racial justice. I'm afraid to mute myself again, so I'm just going to be quiet.
Want to go ahead, Lauren?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm so moved, Rabbi Talve, by what you just shared. And I will say, that inhabiting a variety of identities can sometimes make the work really complicated. I resonated with the relationship building piece that you talked about. And as I was thinking about the ways in which I think my work has had the greatest impact, it really is in the relationship building that we're able to do. And particularly in those personal moments that don't make the interviews or the media pieces or the spotlights, but really it's those moments when I've met, pastorally with other people who are blind particularly, or really with any disability, who are seeking Jewish connection, and they know that there's someone like me out there. That is ultimately, that's what brings me the most joy, when somebody says, how can I get a Braille Mishnah? That's what brings me so much joy. When somebody says, I'm able to do this thing in my synagogue community that I didn't think I could do, or I'm able to, feel more confident that this is a path I can take. Those are the things that happen. And we don't even know often how many people we affect. And, I think that because a lot of the work, in some ways it feels very frontline, and in some ways it feels very behind the scenes. And so trying to figure out kind of that sweet spot, that place where there is space in the movement, is such an important thing to do. And it's something that I feel I'm very much still in process around, particularly when it comes to ableism and disability rights and justice work. Thinking about how, we as, Jews who care deeply about this work, a part of the larger disability justice conversations, is something that I'm committed to thinking through in deeper ways. And I'm doing that work now. And as that work just continues to build out, I think we'll see the impact really radiate out. But one of the deepest things that I think I can do with my platform and with my personal stories is really honor that people are on their different journeys and be able to be a source of support to people as they're navigating what does it mean to be someone who is interested in Jewish community and also has been deeply wounded by religious ideas that are deeply ableist, whether they come from our tradition or not. Unfortunately, we live in a deeply, Christian influenced culture in which there's a lot of ideas about disability that come from, some of it comes from our tradition, a lot of it doesn't, but it's kind of all in the water that we drink. And so my justice work really is helping to create a healthier and spiritually alive way to connect to the sacred for people with disabilities.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Lauren and Susan. And I just want to honor kind of that sense that you just spoke about, Lauren. A number of years ago, I was the first woman rabbi at BJ, and someone said to me that every time I was on the bima, his daughter leaned in, physically. And I think there's something that, not what I want to share in terms of a moment, but I just think it speaks to kind of when someone is visible in whatever form that is, in terms of voice or in terms of how they show up in the world that lets people feel seen through them, seen in all kinds of ways. And so I think that is a piece deeply of being, as women rabbis in particular, and with our own identities, our blessings and our challenges. I feel like that has been the work of women rabbis for 50 years in many ways. And I've experienced that deeply. The one, I mean, again, it's hard to choose, but I guess the one experience I would want to share, which has a both deeply personal aspect to it as well as a communal impact, is I visited Judy Clark, who was part of the Brinks robbery, a very political robbery in Nyack in the early 80s. And I visited her in prison for about 15 years. She was in prison for over 30 years. And so, you know, I was connected with her actually through the gift of Rabbi Rachel Callan, Aleha Shalom. And I both had, I mean, she had done a lot of her tshuva, her repentance, well before I started visiting her. She had been in prison for whatever, 20 years. So she had done a lot of work. But I would say that relationship of being a vessel of conversation for someone, of getting to know someone deeply, about being able also to see someone make choices amongst so much constraint and also feel liberation at the same time, to be a part of that conversation while also being able to be a witness to what was happening in the prison system and the mental health issues and the mass incarceration and how it plays out. And also over the years that I visited her, you could see the change in terms of how hard it was to get into prison, or how many steps, you know, who got stopped along the way. And if you didn't, you know, how the barriers that were put up to really essentially put these people out of our universe so we would never throw them away for good, in a sense. And so I was able to narrate that to my community over time as well, which was not something that most of my community had access to. So simultaneously, it was both a deeply personal relationship as well as one that I could be a witness to for my community. And of course, during her pleas for clemency, and I wrote my letters and all those things and was part of a number of meetings, and whether I was a part of what got her out or not. But ultimately, she's been out for 3 years, 2 of which have been the pandemic. And she, you know, what we had discussed, one of the things we had always fantasized was that when she would be out, she would become part of my community, part of BJ, which she has. And so in a sense, the arc of this story also has taught our community that people are able to make that transformation. And also, you know, her radicalness has changed to some degree over time, and it hasn't changed to some degree, you know, like how people, how she sees justice and what I'm able to vocalize in the conversation that we've cultivated over all these years, and also being a part of someone's physical liberation from prison has been an extraordinary, like, zechut, like it's been a merit. I feel like I've, you know, as much as I've, you know, been a part of her life, of which she has many people who are a part, but as a rabbi, it's just been such a gift and such a learning experience. And I don't think our community would understand some of those or have access to a lot of those stories beyond the New York Times, unless or the New Yorker, or whatever people are reading in my community. And so in that way, I think it raised up an issue that was very much at the back of people's minds, and has brought it forward.
I could sit here and pause and process everything the three of you have said for a while. I'm glad this is recorded for me and for anyone else who wants to go back and listen again. We've had some questions come into the chat. One to me privately. I don't know if it was meant to be private or not, but I'll ask it anyway without saying who asked it. The question is, for all three of you, How do you strengthen yourself when it's hard to see progress? And how do you define success?
I would echo what Lauren said. Success is in the relationships, in the relationship building. Because, you know, we're in such a difficult time right now. You know, I find myself apologizing to every generation of kids I teach and saying, I'm sorry, we were supposed to leave the world better. And it seems, but so how do we do this? I think it is in not giving up. Look, I guess the one thing I want to say to that is I'm a mother who lost a child. You know, I as horrible as everything else is that I see around me, you know, I'm walking around broken and with a broken heart and a bruised soul. And I wondered, you know, I wonder how it is that we're able to get up every day in the world without her. She was everything. You know, she gave my life meaning. I did this work because I was trying to make a better world for her, for my kids, you know, but especially for Adina, she was everything. And you know what? I'll do it. I guess the hope is in the fact that if you have a spiritual practice, you know, and I think this is a really important thing. And maybe people that don't have a spiritual practice or some kind of practice have it too. But I'm looking. People ask me all the time, why aren't you angry? You know, I'm angry, but I'm, you know, not. I haven't lost my faith. I haven't lost my faith that the good in us is going to win. I haven't lost my faith that this work can't make a difference, even though I see us backtracking so much and so much resistance, so much we have to fight for now. But, you know, this is Torah, right? Torah tells us that we're on a path. We have the tools. We have a great toolkit. And we use those tools and we're going to win. You know, we're going to look back at the pages of written history and you know, we'll cry, but we'll go forward. And I believe we can make things better. I still believe we can change the world. You know, I do. And so here we are, using these tools, building these relationships, because, you know, like both Felicia and Lauren said, it's these relationships. You know, you can diversify as much as you want. You can bring diversity into any institution. It's not going to change unless you have relationships of trust. So that's what saves us. And that's what's going to save us, is these relationships. Who wants to answer that?
I want to echo so much of what Rabbi Talve just shared. First, on the relationships of trust, and to your point directly about you can bring all the diversity you want into an institution, but change won't happen without the relationships of trust. I have personally been on that journey around being the disabled voice, quote unquote, brought in. And not only did it not change anything, it actually made everything worse. Because you know when you're being tokenized, you know deep in your neshama when you're being tokenized. And so much of this work, as everyone has been saying, has to come from the relationships, but it also has to come from a deep well of spiritual practice. That's my personal view. I do a lot of teaching around Jewish spirituality, contemplative practice. I feel that is an essential component. I don't think that is a luxury. I think it's an essential component, and it affects everything that I do. And even on those days when I notice that my own emunah is starting to fade, my own faith is like, I don't know, are we good? Like, is that goodness actually going to win out? I'm reminded that Torah has been with our people for thousands and thousands of years, and we have lived through as a people horrible times before. And we have this amazing toolkit. And, there's not one way to approach Torah, thank God. Our tradition doesn't believe that, right? That we have all these different pathways. But whatever our spiritual practices are, let those be sustaining for us in those moments when it feels like everything is just going backward. And when I think about the microaggressions that I experience, when I think about the resistance that we are experiencing collectively, when I think about the fear, when I think about what the past 2 years have done to people and the ways in which all of this awful in our own country and around the world, everything that we are navigating through right now, the isolation and how people how that is manifested for people and how it's completely narrowed people's worlds in real literal ways, and my own fear around what that's going to mean for the disabled community, and my own fear around what that's going to mean for all of us, frankly, whether we have disabilities or not. I think back to the ways in which spiritual practice can connect us to that which is greater than who we are as individuals, and that we're part of a much broader and greater project in the world. And I do believe that Tikkun Olam is a relevant and alive concept. And I just want to reiterate again that the thing that's going to make the change, it may not change everything in a way that's going to make the New York Times or the New Yorker or whatever, but if you can build those relationships of trust, if we can do that as a Jewish community with other communities, if we can do that as a Jewish community within our own community, what a difference that's going to make. Ultimately, I think that is the ikar of what has to happen for anything else to happen.
Thank you. I mean, in some sense, there's like no more to say. I totally align with Susan and Lauren's notion of like the well of wisdom and the sense of our community has suffered and yearned for thousands of years, and we are the recipients of that Torah that has been born out of all of those feelings. And I really feel I was teaching the Eish Kodesh, the Piasetzner Rebbe, who went to his death during the Shoah, and his teachings were found after the Shoah. And I happened to be teaching that when the pandemic hit. And it obviously is not the same, the Shoah and the pandemic, and yet the sense of suffering and fear, and it was like all there and I think the dominant feeling of our tradition is a push towards salvation. And I just can't, that's the pull. And there are so many ways that the tradition articulates that. And I feel an incredible blessing to be in that conversation. And I think also very powerful teaching that I stumbled upon by Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, Alav Shalom, was that faith isn't a noun, it's a verb. And I think, faith is about living through and pushing through. And I feel like for me, at least in my rabbinate, part of what the engine, as much as sometimes the frustration rises up, is like living in community and relationship, watching things grow and change and evolve and push back and move forward, and the longevity in relationship, which is the fuel to move forward. And I think also we have limited views in our own generation. And even, I don't think of myself as old, but there's a whole generation that's well younger than me now that has even different notions of justice, and the ways that I have different notions of justice from the generations before, and we need it all. So I don't say that because I'm not feeling despair at any points or anger, but I do feel like the well of the tradition, the gift of being in this discourse for a life vocation, is the strength that I need to continually having an imagination, which is, I think, part of what our tradition teaches us.
I love that phrase of continuing to have an imagination and how that connects to justice work of imagining a different world and what it would take to get there. We are so close to being out of time, but we were given permission. We can pretend it's from Hashem to ask one more question, which I know there were many more questions than this, but I did want to bring attention to Rabbi Marla Feldman's question, who I just want to mention is the executive director of the Women for Reform Judaism, which, as Rabbi Zaymor mentioned at the beginning of Rabbi Clafter, mentioned at the beginning of our session, gave the generous yes grant for these programs. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that before asking you this question, which is pretty much, so she says, with all the issues we face, racial justice, inclusion, gun violence, LGBTQIA rights, reproductive rights, voting rights, the list goes on, how do you prioritize where to focus your energy? And once you make that choice, how do you reconcile that decision with awareness of the need to address all the other critical issues? In other words, she writes, how do you manage the challenge of not being able to do it all? I'm sure you each have a simple answer.
Well, it is helpful to find your lane. You know, it is helpful because it can be so overwhelming. And you know, I'm looking at my friend Rachel. I hope it's okay to say, we're about to have a baby. You don't get that time back with your babies. So, you know, it's important. I mean, you know, you have to figure out what keeps you up at night. What is it that's keeping you up, and find your lane, and trust that you're not doing this work alone, and, you know, reach out and support other people. You know, that's the other thing, is we don't have to be the front line of every you know, issue. We can be the supportive, you know, back. We could be the arms that are holding from the back. We don't have to be at the front of every issue. So I would say it is a tremendous challenge, especially when there are so many things that are calling us, that we feel like we have the privilege and we have the tools to make a difference. And, you know, and I think part of the answer, if I would look back, you don't have to do everything. Make sure you're supporting the people who are out there doing other things. You know, we can find ways to support causes without having to always be the front line. And then to make sure that when you choose a lane, it is something that you really have something. It's personal, and you have something to bring to that, and you have the relationships that are really going to make a difference. If I look back, there are things that I wish I didn't. Meetings I wish I didn't go to, boards that I wish I didn't spend time on, that I would have had time for other things. So looking back, I would say, I wish somebody had said to me, pick and choose a little bit better, because you don't have to do everything, because there are good people out there, and find ways to support them in their work as well. Don't always have to be you.
To echo what Susan just said, it does not always have to be you. And there is nothing that, you know, makes me feel like this work is moving in a good direction than when I get emails about things like people writing essays about the Torah's positive depictions of disability, and I knew nothing about it. And the reason that feels so good is because, again, it doesn't have to be me. You know, it's not on me always to do everything. To find that lane is really important. And to really ask yourself, why do I feel compelled to show up? That is the question that I'm always asking myself. Why and what can I bring here? Is there some unfinished business that is propelling me, unfinished personal, psychological business that's propelling me? And am I approaching this in a healthy way? So that would be what I would just add to what Susan just said.
Can I also add, sometimes it's our job to hold the space because of our privilege. Like I have learned that part of my work is to hold space for Black women. You know, my Black sisters, when I can hold the space for them so that they can, you know, it's another way to make space, right?
I mean, I agree with what Susan and Lauren have said. I would just say also that there's a terrible underbelly of the rabbinate that is a martyrdom complex. And I feel really deeply that that's not what we were put on earth for. And that's not what the rabbinate is meant to be. And there's this very powerful teaching of the Slonemer Rebbe that asks, what does God ask of you at this particular hour, at this particular time? And I think being attentive to that question, which is to have the humility to know that we, you know, we can't be everything to everyone, and we can't be everything or the front lines for all issues. I think one of the wisdoms of the community organizing work is actually to do a power analysis. Like, where is my power? Like, do I actually have the influence to change this? Where is my influence? And that's different for different people and the amount of time that I have available to do certain things. And so, and I agree with Susan that I think I've shifted over time to recognize, like, my voice is actually not that important in this space, but here it really will be impactful. And I'm more discerning about that. And I think that's been helpful because, and that's where I would say the activism mind versus kind of a more integrated calling over time is like rather than how many rallies can a person run to in a certain sense that actually, I'm not sure mattered in the big scheme of things. Some of them, yes, but some of them, no. And so, and to have some both humility and discernment to do that. And then I think, I just, it's really about calling, like where we feel called to show up and to be in relationship to know when it's our job to show up, even if we weren't, even if it doesn't fit in the schedule, you know? So I think there's both those moments, like an emergency moment and a non-emergency moment. And what's also the arc that we're looking at on these issues. And some of them are today, tomorrow, and some of them are much more long haul and being smart about it. Because many years ago, this organization, the Rockwood organization, was born because progressives were killing themselves, but they weren't winning. And the training was to essentially connect people to purpose and give them skills and all these things, because sometimes we kill ourselves and we're still not winning. And so I think literally, I feel deeply moved by that question, you know, where is my purpose and how can I make a difference that's smart and actually is going to affect change, rather than being centered on ego and feeling like it's all about what gets splashed in a paper. And it's challenging for the ego too, to confront those questions, like Lauren said. And I think that we as rabbis should be sophisticated enough to be willing to confront those demons.
Such an honor to learn from all three of you and to hear your wisdom. you're giving me so much to think about. I want to go after this and journal, like, what is my purpose? What is my calling? What is my lane? Right. And so we just want to thank you so much for being here and giving us your time and deciding that tonight, this is one of the places that you should show up. I think I could tell looking around in the little Zoom boxes that what you said really had an impact and really moved people. So I want to close us out tonight with a prayer. By now, many of you have probably seen the news of the terrorist attack in Israel. And of course, Rabbi Clafter started us out tonight with a prayer for peace in Ukraine. And really all of this work, being on the front lines or being behind the scenes, seeking justice, working towards inclusivity, equity, anti-racism, all of this really is about wholeness and peace and a better world and a world of shalom. And so I heard this prayer for the first time from Rabbi Stephanie Crawley, a colleague of mine here in DC. And it's written by Sheikha, and I'm going to, even though my husband speaks Arabic and he already told me how to say this, I've already forgotten how to pronounce it correctly, but it's written by Sheikha Ibtisam Mohammed and Rabbi Tamar Elad Applebaum. I think it's really beautiful, and I think it'll be the right way for us to close. For these things I weep. My eye runs down with water. For our children crying at nights. For parents holding their children with despair and darkness in their hearts. For a gate that is closing, and who will open it while day has not yet dawned. And with my tears and prayers which I pray, and with the tears of all women who deeply feel the pain of these difficult days, I raise my hands to you, please God, have mercy on us. Hear our voice that we shall not despair, that we shall see life in each other, that we shall have mercy for each other, that we shall have pity on each other, that we shall hope for each other, and we shall write our lives in the book of life. For your sake, God of life, let us choose life. For you are peace. Your world is peace, and all that is yours is peace. And so shall be your will. And we can all say it together. Amen. Erev Tov, thank you so much for being with us, and to everyone who attended.
And a thank you to our friends and colleagues, both on the panel, and Bess and Rachel, for the hours of work in developing and bringing these three wonderful speakers to us. And again, I echo the thanks to all of you. Like, as Rachel said a few times, I'm just sitting here kind of breathing. So we thank you. And we hope to see you at our next event, which is online on Zoom on April 5th. And again, May 11th and June 2nd. So Lila Tov, wherever you may be. If you're on the West Coast, it's time for dinner. If you're on the East Coast, it might be bedtime, but we are grateful. We are grateful to all of you. Thank you.